Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second and final day of the World Journalist Conference 2021. My name is Jung Min-ho, Digital Content Editor at the Korea Times, Head of the International Relations Department at the Journalists Association of Korea, and moderator of today's event. Today's big topic is climate change and the role of journalism. Climate change is one of the biggest and most pressing challenges of our times. Over the past decade, we have been told and seen that temperatures are rising, wildfires are happening more frequently, rainfall patterns are shifting, and icebergs are melting. On a positive note, governments around the world are working together to mitigate this challenge, developing new technologies and changing laws and regulations. Many believe the media's role is also critical. Today, 23 experts and journalists from around the world will talk about what role journalists can and should play in fighting this global crisis. We will cover many topics in a limited time today, so each speaker will have 5 minutes for the presentation, except for the first and last speakers. If you look at the screen, you can see how much time you have left. If it goes beyond the given time, I may have to stop you to move on to the next speaker. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, please send us the question you have with the name of the speaker you want to ask that question to. The presentation order is displayed on the screen, so please remember your presentation order. If you lose your internet connection or have any issue, we will move on to the next speaker and then invite you again after all the speakers finish their presentations. Now, let's begin with our first speaker, Mr. Chang Da-ul from the Greenpeace East Asia Seoul office.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning and good evening. It's my great honor to speak in front of prestigious and experienced journalists from all over the world. I'm working for Greenpeace East Asia Seoul office as a governmental relations and advocacy specialist, and we have offices in Hong Kong, Beijing, Taipei, Seoul, and Tokyo, covering the 3 major countries in East Asia. Today is great honor to discuss about the role of journalism and media for climate change. As we all know, we are living in an era of climate emergency. Let me repeat again. We are living in an era of climate emergency. Let me begin with my story old speech with this beautiful picture, as you can see in the screen. This is the cherry blossom blooming in Kansai area in Japan. As you know, in East Asia, including Korea, Japan, and China, we celebrate the beauty of spring with the blooming of the cherry blossom flowers. But in this year, 2021, the cherry blossom in Kyoto in Japan was the earliest in 1200 years. The last time the blooming was earlier than this year was 812 years. Not only in Japan, in South Korea as well, usually we have a cherry blossom blooming in early April, but this time the blooming was 21st of March in Seoul, the capital of South Korea. Then why the cherry blossom came earlier this year is obvious that it's influenced by the global climate change. But climate change is not about having cherry blossom earlier than before. And it's not about just an environmental problem. It's a serious problem of collapsing the life-sustaining climate system on our planet. We have seen a number of extreme weather events in recent years. As you all remember, we witnessed the 2019 and 20 Australian bushfires killed 1 billion wild animals. We also remember the wildfires in the US, especially in California region in 2020. Last year, South Korea also had the longest monsoon for 54 days, which was the largest since the observation started in 1922 in this country. And also the flood in China, the flood in Japan, and recently the cold wave in Texas in the US also created a number of problems. And among them, more than 4,000 sea turtles fainted because of the cold wave, and people had to rescue them. And we see all these extreme events signaling the one simple fact that we are living in a climate emergency. When we talk about how to overcome climate crisis, the scientific conclusion is obvious. In 2018, the IPCC gathered here in South Korea and approved the special report of global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. That means the global average temperature has been increased already more than 1 degree Celsius. And if we don't stop the additional increase within 0.5 degrees Celsius until the end of this century, we will surpass the serious tipping point of climate change, and the life of people and also the life of animals and all living things on this planet will have a serious consequences because of the climate crisis. So in order to overcome this climate crisis, we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. In order to be carbon neutral by 2050, all the countries in the world need to decrease their carbon emission by 50% within 10 years. When we talk about climate change, we talk about carbon budget. The carbon budget means in order to limit the additional increase within 1.5 degrees Celsius, the amount of carbon emission we have left. And in 2018, it was 420 gigatons. But when I checked the latest carbon clock provided by the MCC in Germany, we have less than 300 gigatons because the 3 years has already passed. So without drastic change of decreasing our carbon emission, within 7 years, our goal of limiting global average temperature increase within 1.5 degree will not be possible. So this is the challenge we have. And in February this year, the UNFCCC released the initial NDC census report covering 72 countries, which takes about 30% of the global carbon emissions. And China and US, the top two emitters, were not included. But the outcome of the analysis was shocking because based on the NDCs, the national carbon emission reduction targets by 2030, based on the analysis, the possible reduction will be around 0.5%. Even though we have to achieve 45% by 2030, our reality is 0.5%. So the governments in the world and the companies in the world, the local governments, are not ready to tackle the serious crisis we face. So when we talk about the role of media or journalism in tackling the global climate crisis, I think the most important thing for media to do is that the journalism need to tell the stories of climate change and translate the complex climate science into simple understanding for the public. Because as we all know, the climate science is not simple. And we always see hundreds of thousands of different figures and graphs. And climate change includes different feedback loops, negative and positive feedback loops. And people sometimes ask questions why we are having cold winter even though the global warming is going. It's all related to the complex climate science. But the report from the IPCC or the UNFCCC don't resonate with the people easily. So the media has obligation to tell the stories which resonate with the majority of the listeners and the public. And second, we need to connect with what matters to different audiences. Climate change is not an agenda only for the liberal people. It's not only an agenda for the conservative people. It's an agenda for everybody on this planet. But people have tendencies to take attitude and decisions on climate change not based on scientific understanding, but based on their values, based on their ideologies, based on their beliefs. So the media need to tell the stories based on different values and different angles. We need to talk about not only the public health problems or extreme weather event, how serious the damage would be, but also we need to talk about food security, how much it will be affected by the climate crisis, and also economic development. Sustainable development is also important for our life. So for those who put the utmost focus on sustainable development or job creation or national security, they also need to understand how the climate change will affect on these values. So climate change is not only about extreme weather event. It's not only about difficulties for farming or fisheries, but it's about economy. It's about jobs. It's about our life, and it's about the very existence of human beings on this planet. In South Korea, there have been a number of media focusing on climate change, which will be covered by journalist Yunjiro in today's session in the end. But also, I would like to introduce some of the progresses of South Korean media has made in recent years. There is a media called JTBC in Korea, and the journalist called Park Sang-wook. He has covered climate stories every week since November 2019. And I think the series has covered around 74 pieces, focusing on economic angles, public health angles, food security angles, and also the important conferences and the report. And it really helps the Korean public to understand different aspects of climate change. And also, I would like to introduce one good example of Gyeongyang Daily newspaper in South Korea. They came up with a series called The Witness of Climate Change. And the media interviewed different witnesses in different fields. For example, they interview the person who spent their whole life in the sea for catching the shells and other sea products. And she really told the stories to the Korean public that after more than 30 years of experiences, how the sea has changed because of the climate change. So she was the witness of the sea. So this series introduced the witness of the sea, witness of the forest, the witness of the wildfires, and it really resonated with the Korean public as well. As you can see the graph in the middle of the slide, the number of media articles covering climate change in South Korea average in every month was much lower than the average coverage of climate change articles in other countries. So climate change was not a main topic for Korean media until 2019, as personally felt. But because of the global climate action by millions of people and increased interest and also the increased voices from the people and grassroots organizations, the number of media covering climate change has quite increased in South Korea. So I see the hope for that. And lastly, media also need to communicate the urgency, but we shouldn't kill the hopes. We all know that the situation we face at the moment is not really positive. As I show you the stark discrepancy between the 0.5% versus 45%, but we still do see a number of hopes. The financing institutions are changing their attitude on climate change. And the global major corporations are also changing their sources from fossil fuels to renewable energies. As you may heard of RE100, which is Renewable Electricity 100, which is a global campaign of global corporations committing for sourcing their power with 100% renewable energies. Recently, the number of major global corporations joined the RE100 reached the number of 300. And there was no Korean company until last year, but now we have little less than 10 Korean major companies coming for Renewable Energy 100. So that's one positive signal. We are also expecting the World Leaders Summit on Climate, initiated by the US President Joe Biden, forthcoming the April 22nd and 23rd meeting. And now there is a positive signal that the US will commit their NDCs for more than 50% reduction by 2030. Also, there has been a number of media articles saying that Japan will almost double their commitment in the coming forum. So these are the positive signals we see. Also, the average share of renewable electricity among OECD countries last year already increased up to 32%. And these are the positive signals we need to tell to the people that it is possible to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. And it is possible to change our industrial system. It is possible to change our civilization based on the fossil fuels. And in order to do that, we need the support not only from the people, not only from the NGOs like Greenpeace, not only from corporations, but also we need the support from the local governments, central government, and also the role of media is very important in this difficult journey. So lastly, I would like to say that journalism should be an answer to overcoming climate crisis. It should not be a problem. What I mean by problem is that there are first solutions. Some people argue that we need to increase the nuclear power, we need to increase the CCUS, we need to move to another planet because we cannot overcome this climate change. Or in order to secure the economic development modeling in the past, we shouldn't be too much regulated by the climate regulation. These are the false solutions. And the media has obligation to tell what these false solutions bring us into tragedy in the future. So that's my last message for today. And thank you again for giving me a chance to speak in front of experienced and prestigious journalists from all over the world. And I'm very looking forward to listen to different opinions and suggestions and also the discussion point for today's 4-hour session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chang, for sharing your expertise. Our next speaker is Mr. Patul Bari Akırakaru, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at the Kabul Times in Afghanistan. Due to technical problems, we are going to play his video presentation.
First, I want to thank the in-charge and members of the World Journalist Conference for hosting the online conference and the beautiful city of Seoul, the capital city of South Korea. Distinguished journalists, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has far-reaching effects on humans. It includes effects on health, environment, displacement and migration, security, society, energy, and the like. Climate change has brought about possibly irreversible alteration to the geological, biological, and ecological systems of the Earth. These changes have led to the emergence of large-scale environmental hazards to human health, such as extreme weather, ozone depletion, increased danger of wildfires, loss of biodiversity, threats to food-producing systems, and the global spread of infectious diseases. In addition, according to the World Health Organization, climate change were estimated in 2002 to cause over 150,000 deaths annually. And the organization warned that the number will increase to 250,000 deaths annually between 2030 and 2050. In addition to their impacts on human health, the climate change have also kept their impacts on food supply, economic growth, societal change, and public goods such as drinking water. However, the consequences could either be harmful or helpful considering local populations. According to studies, for instance, climate change in Siberia are expected to improve food production and local economic activity in the medium term. While in Bangladesh, the climate change have caused an increase in sensitive diseases such as malaria, child diarrhea, pneumonia, and other health problems in the vulnerable communities. The studies suggest that the net current and future impact of climate change on human health and the societies we live will continue overwhelmingly negative. Poor and low-income communities around the world with much higher level of vulnerability are mostly experiencing most of the adverse effects of the climate change. So what journalists can do to at least mitigate the negative impact of the climate change? Indeed, journalists facing a new challenge on how to warn the mass to avoid the rising harms of the climate change in their communities. In the face of a society facing climate change, journalists must play a major enlightening role and has to be the link between scientists and citizens. Professionals, researchers, and trainers in journalism from all over the world should jointly and coordinately work and exchange on best practices, innovations, and challenges we believe facing on how to mitigate the harmful impacts of the climate change. Journalists have to first understand the science and ethics of climate change, and then educate citizens about the ethical dimension of the climate change policy formation. Climate change should be given importance as much as global peace and security, and should be one of the integral part of journalist missions to focus on. For example, when journalists cover war and security in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and other war-affected nations, and reveal the hidden truths behind the same, they have to highlight climate change and make public its negative impacts through discussion with the scientists and experts of the climate change. Journalists should often explain complex climate science by legitimizing sources and see how audiences process various messages about scientific uncertainty, how climate stories compete with other issues for drawing public attention, how large-scale economic and political factors shape news production, and how the media can engage public audiences in climate change. Also, in many developed countries, if journalists often release reports and broadcast live on how this or that country developed fast and how both the states and the nations joined hands to develop their countries, This is also imperative for the journalist to highlight the adverse effects of these developments, as indefinitely the developments are highly made up through setting up factories and installation of plants with heavily level of rise of weather temperature that studies said was behind quick climate change, in addition to mass pollution of the air. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Akagar. Our next speaker is Mr. Habib Toumi, a media advisor to the Bahrain News Agency in Bahrain.
Hello from Bahrain. I wish to thank the Journalists Association of Korea and the Asian Journalists Association for this opportunity to be among fine journalists to discuss global issues. First, I'd like to congratulate Saudi Arabia on the 2 green initiatives announced last month by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative aim to plant 50 billion trees. Yes, that's right, 50 billion trees to help make the Middle East a greener place. As someone coming from the Middle East, I can tell you this is some of the best news we have heard in many years. Next. In fact, Gulf countries such as Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have been pushing for solutions to the terrible effects of climate change. Next. Elsewhere, many countries are also acting for a better world. Serbia has saved 180 million A4 sheets and 18,000 trees since adopting e-services. Denmark's climate law blazes path for new policies. New Zealand has now a law that forces banks to reveal the impact of their investments on climate change. Google Earth last week added time-lapse video to show climate change. Next. Not many people have heard about the Saudi initiatives or the decisions by Serbia, Denmark, New Zealand, or Google Earth. Proper communication is a major challenge. Other challenges are confusion, denial, skepticism, and of course, political and business interests. Next. Climate change is not just words. It's real and very, very scary. People are losing their homes, fields, water, food, jobs, and lives. Scientists, policymakers, and the media should work together to save lives, protect people. The main message is that if we don't act now, there will be a destruction of life as we know it and as we love it. Look at Lake Chad, for example, in Africa. 40 million people have lost either their lives or their livelihood in 40 years. The Maldives is also at a very high risk. 80% of the country is less than 1 meter above sea level. You can imagine what could happen. Next. It's a huge fight, and the media has a very crucial role. Do not underestimate the power of the media. Policy actors rely on the media to convey messages and to receive feedback. The people need the media to understand what's going on. This is next. This is why the fight against climate change is won or lost in the media. Newspapers, TV, radio, the internet, mobile phones. So there's no bad journalism. It's always good journalism to win the fight. Next. The good news is that the media is coming out of its sleep now to cover climate change and engage the public. It is slow, but it is happening, as our friend from Greenpeace has just told us about the situation in Korea. Next. This is great because the media should lead the fight against lack of information, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. We can see what all these have done and their impact in the post-truth era. We all suffer from their tsunami effects in the COVID-19 pandemic. Next. This means the media should know how to formulate and present the messages. Communicating about climate change is not like writing a news story. You don't apply the same rules or norms. You need expertise. Next. That's why some media are now training their staff how to understand, cover, and report on climate change. We saw this today at the special session with Debbie, for example. Through workshops and field practice, the media is learning how to cover climate change from the local angle to make it relevant to the local people and not just rely on international agencies. You see pictures here from Africa and also from Latin America. Next. People often say they are confused about how climate change is explained. The media should make the complex data and difficult language used by scientists easier to understand so that people can relate to what's happening. Next. At the same time, the media should engage with policymakers and businesses. It's not easy because they often say climate change is not a winning message. It does not bring jobs and people are not interested in it. Next. Well, the media should show that fighting climate change is a winning message and that it can create jobs and save lives. The media should promote the necessary actions from governments, businesses, and the public to build green economies. Next. To be fair, we recognize that several leading companies have been working on green policies. They are great examples. For example, when we visited Samsung City 2 years ago, we appreciated how the company has taken a green approach since the 1990s and how it's still committed to it. Next. So we need to have a proactive media that helps increase awareness, affect attitudes, and change behavior within the public, politicians, and businesses. Next, when they all appreciate that confronting climate change is in their interest, they get involved in the fight because it means their survival and their success. Next, there's little hope of dealing successfully with the dangers of climate change until enough people join the fight. Next, and when the media, the public, politicians, and businesses join hands and work together, they can address climate change, protect their communities, and save the planet. There's now a strong possibility to make the world safer and better. Let's show that by doing the right things, the media can help make that possibility a sweet reality. Thank you, best of luck, and stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. Tomi. Our next speaker is Mr. Ahmed Jamil, News and Content Advisor to the Asian Television based in Bangladesh.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning from Bangladesh and good afternoon in South Korea. My dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very delighted to be a part of this international conference. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and sincere thanks for inviting me to speak at World Journalist Conference 2021. I'm glad to mention that I was also invited to speak in the last two World Journalist Conferences. As you mentioned, I work for television as a talk show host, and also I'm involved with the leading private university North-South as the director. Let me share some of my ideas and thoughts regarding this presentation on climate change and the role of journalism, which because of the time limitation, I would like to present it. I haven't prepared the slide that I'll read out here. The global climate issues and role of journalism is really an important topic currently because our journalists really can play some role, and how I have presented, I would like to present that way. There's a background and context of this matter. You know, journalism can play significant role in disseminating policy reform agenda on local climate, on local climate issues, because if they can mobilize these issues through policymakers, that would be a great area to work. As climate change is a global issue, we all know it has impact all over the world, and journalism can connect relevant stakeholders for policy reform dialogues and also in setting up agendas for way forward. So this is an area where journalists can really connect resources all over the world. Some activities, you know, are very essential to really mobilize in this sector. In my previous experience with Barak University, I was the executive director of Journalism Training and Research Center. That time we found conducting training and capacity building issues on global climate issues and journalism would be a good area to work, because if we can really train journalists, they can contribute in this sector. Second area of work could be, you know, arranging some fellowship for journalists on global climate change issues. There are several institutions. We closely worked with Johns Hopkins University in the US at that time, and some other areas on climate issues. Journalists can be given fellowship. Third area is, you know, I personally believe that mobilizing electronic and print media and organizing policy dialogue among the stakeholders would be another area. And there could be some television and radio programs on this, on the climate change, to public awareness, to create public awareness. Disseminating, designing investigative journalism program focusing on climate change would be another area, because if we can think of designing an investigative program, that would really mobilize the real stakeholders. And I would, last but not the least, I'll focus on conducting research on climate change and journalism, so that journalists can get food for thought for writing in the newspapers and television news. And I would say that there could be a handbook on journalism and climate change, so that journalists can get all the data and ready materials in their hand. And I expect through these works, there will be some expected results. By implementing above mentioned activities, journalists, media professionals, and other stakeholders can be oriented on different issues related to climate change. Second, informed journalists and media professionals can produce reports, articles, radio, TV news on climate change policy reform agenda. Third, journalists can work as catalysts for change, focusing on climate change. Fourth, journalists can influence civil society, media, government on climate change. Fifth, journalists can play a vital role in climate change financing policy issues as well. Last 3 points I'll mention and finish my presentation. I see some way forward by planning, designing, and implementing the above mentioned activities I just mentioned. I see 3 areas to work on. Create a stakeholders database on climate change and journalism. If we can create who does what by when sort of database, who's who, so the journalists can get access to those experts easily. Second is, we can organize some national, international level dialogue and conference, maybe in future virtually, that could really generate some ideas and issues. And third and the last one, organize some exchange program, which is a bit difficult in this COVID situation, but there could be some more different arrangement in this pandemic situation. So through these pinpointed activities, I believe journalists really can play some significant role in the area of global climate issues. And we, as a part of this community, I strongly believe we journalists and media professionals really have some role to play in this area of importance currently. I especially thank the organizers and also thank my participants, dear colleagues. I also see some participants from my country, Bangladesh. I also thank them and welcome them. And I would like to stop here. Thank you very much. Stay well and safe. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Jamil. Our next speaker is Mr. Mohammed Tawfiq Ali, a former journalist at the Daily Star in Bangladesh.
Thank you, JAK. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Dear distinguished colleagues from all across the world, today we speak on the issue of climate change and climate change impacts simply because of the fact that we need to ensure and achieve sustainability of development, resilience of life, rational of consumption, food security, security of fresh water, and finally, the global peace. The next slide, please. Climate change poses one of the gravest threats the entire humanity is faced with today. It affects life simply because of the fact that it affects life, livelihood, and ecology, making our future look uncertain and bleak. Journalists have a very important role to play in this respect because they write, they communicate, they inform, they disseminate, they educate, and they advocate. And finally, they sensitize people on consumption behavior and over-extraction of natural resources and waste of irreplaceable natural scanty resources like fresh water on our mother planet. They have a role to make climate issues more important than any other, like politics or economy. Earth journalists advocate the fact that life, livelihood, ecology, economic progress, all rest on climatic balance and stability. Next, please. Journalism decipher complex science and mathematics of climate change, and thereby they play the vital role in setting development agenda globally in accordance with the agreed climate protocol for cutting carbon footprint and mitigating global temperature rise. Professional reputation and credibility, trust and authenticity, the distinguished journalist's role and work. So more than ever before, journalists have got to highlight climate crisis consistently on a greater scale in the face of a complacent mindset of some communities in the world, like it's our world, we'll use it all up if we want to. So if journalism makes public access easy to the news stories on climate change's imminent and future consequences, hopefully people will heartily realize and embrace the importance of living sustainably. The next, please. So, alongside climate scientists, climate advocates, and environmentally sensitive politicians, the role of journalists is all the more necessary and more important for delving out accurate, authentic information for the unsuspecting commoners. By dint of certain professional credibility and objectivity that the journalist community command, journalists hold the key to advocate global agenda for sustainable development with the conservation of environment and natural resources against insensitive extraction and insensitive irresponsible consumption pattern. Journalists' role is pivotal in regard of reporting natural disasters induced by extreme weather and climate change, eventualities like displacement caused by floods, cyclones, sea level rise, erratic rainfall, and loss in old-fashioned agricultural production system. Therefore, they may educate on the effect of ozone layer depletion, global warming, and threat of melting ice caps and rise in the sea level. And in regard of sensitizing the national and global leadership on their role as stewards of the earth, our Mother Earth, for the very survival of our planet. The next slide, please. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Angel Fernando Galindo Ortega, freelance journalist based in Colombia. Please press the unmute button. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yes, we can.
Good evening. Sorry. Again, I'm sorry. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the Journalists Association of Korea and worldwide colleagues. Then the topic of my presentation will be focused more on actions, less on tragedies. Then the topics of my presentations are going to be firstly climate information, objective perspective, and look for a different approach. Next page, please. Then climate change information, more projects, less apocalyptic news. Currently, due to the quick and fast movement of the news, the audiences are looking for some information quick, fast, but we have forgotten that we arrived to a kind of alarmism. For instance, just some month ago or some weeks ago was published in the media the idea of the apocalyptic melting of an iceberg and how the apocalyptic or how this apocalyptic melting is going to destroy them. But firstly, we haven't really analyzed if that was the main cause of the problem. And second, then on the other hand, we have, instead of report just the bad news, we have forgotten important projects like Ocean Clean, made by the young entrepreneur from Dylan Boyan Salat, or also the 4 River Major Restoration that was organized by the former South Korean President Lee Myung-bak, that proposed to improve 4 rivers like the Han, Namsu, Jeon, and Gyeongsan in Seoul. These projects have been forgotten from the media and just included in small, quick, and scientific magazines. And it's the idea that we have to highlight instead of just the bad news. Next page, please. Then other perspectives, listen other voices and have open debates. Former members from Greenpeace, like Patrick Moore, or young journalists from the website media like Will Wheat, have said that, okay, the climate change is one of the biggest problems of the earth, but not the biggest one. And also they have blamed that all is blame of the human footprint, but we forget that they are all natural factors that affects the evolution of the weather. Next page, please. Then other perspective. There is a scientific consensus that the climate change is one of the biggest threats of the humankind. But experts like the Professor Brian Lundberg, president of the Copenhagen Consensus Organization, has said that, okay, in his book, he has written in his book, The False Alarm, that, okay, the climate change is one of the biggest threats of the human earth. Until here, everybody will agree. But we have another issues to tackle. Then we have we have lack of social equality. We have infectious disease that also are really dangerous that we have to balance and put together in this next page, please. Other perspectives, then according to the Professor Lundberg, there are solutions that have been proposed that leak energy, solar, wind, but this energy that have covered just 1% of the people needs energy. Then and these products have been really expensive for the society. Then, okay, then is it necessary that governments like France, United States just subsidize that energy and forgot other alternatives? Then it's something that we have to make the reflection. Next page, please. Also, one other problem that has been highlighted is that the alarmism. It's necessary to cover up the different problems that we have tackled that we have with the climate change. But the excessive alarmism have made that politicians and communities in general made bad decisions. And that bad decisions that had also affected the jobs and the communities in general. Next page, please. Look at different approaches, study more the realities of the society. Some radical activists have said that, for instance, people mustn't fly because that affects the environment. But there are areas, especially in Latin American and African countries, that have a really bad infrastructure. Then the only way that they have to communicate, to provide products, to connect each other and to connect with other places is by plane. Also, Latin American and African politicians have said that we use electric cars, we can use the public transportation, but for instance, the public transportation in cities like Bogota in Colombia or Asunción, Paraguay is really bad. The lack of security, the criminality have affected, and it's difficult that people go to that. Then next page, please. Then what solutions we can give to the people? Compostable bottles, eco-friendly technologies that people can pay and provide. Next page, please. Finally, as a quick conclusion, I want to say that the media that we have as a media to find a balance between open a debate about other people that have different ideas, solutions that provide help to the communities, and understand that we have a problem with the climate change, but that is connected with the society, with the real people, with the real needs of the people. If we don't tackle altogether the social inequality, the public transportation in the cities, we are not able to really deal with the climate change. The climate change is not an entity. We are part of the system, but we need to tackle our problems at the same time that we did with the problems of the earth. We cannot separate them, or we cannot be extremists or alarmists. We need to be responsible with the information and open the microbes and open our media to other point of view that for some people don't like it, but these opinions have to be listened to have a real and huge approach about that. Thank you for your time. And I know this is a little controversial, but I hope so that you enjoy this point of view. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. As a reminder, if you have any questions for any of the speakers today, send us your question with the name of the speaker you will ask that question to. Our next speaker is Professor Katuna Chapigaje at the Georgian Technical University in Georgia.
Hello, everybody. So I will be actually focusing on the case of Georgia in the context of global climate issues, of course, and the role of journalism. Next slide, please. Okay, first of all, I would like perhaps to mention the national report on the state of the environment of Georgia, which was actually addressing the period from 2014 to 2017. And concerning the question about the trends of GHG emissions, which is the most important, as you might understand, or among the most important issues in recent years in the country, that document states that Georgia's total GHG emissions in 2015 amounted to about over 17 million tons of CO2 equivalent, so 62% of which were from the energy sector, and the rest, meaning the 38 lesser for non-energy related GHG emissions, comprising 18% of the agricultural sector, 12% of the industry sector, and the waste sector with 8%. Next slide, please. So based on the same report, actually the climate, as a result of the climate change in Georgia, the same, as you might understand, the problems with the temperature rising is very persistent, and it was analyzed from the period of 1960s to 2010, first decade of the 21st century. And during that period, the average annual temperature increased by 0.44 or from 0.4 to 0.50 Celsius. The highest trend of increase was observed in Tedopliskaro, which is the eastern region in Kakheti, eastern Georgia, with 0.70 Celsius, and Poti in Samegelo-Zerno-Swaneti in western part of Georgia with 0.60 Celsius. In the same period, also the annual precipitation increased, especially in the western part of Georgia, by 5%, but we observed decrease in the eastern part by actually 0.1%. The next slide, please. Regarding the obligations which actually Georgia has assumed under the Paris Agreement when it joined, it was the promise to unconditionally, of course, reduce the emissions up to 15%, but it also promised to make all the efforts for its commitments towards the limitation up to 25%, but just in case of the international support. The next slide, please. In order to actually illustrate the most challenging environmental issues, which are very topical up to nowadays, perhaps it's much more logical to just stop and discuss these two major controversial projects like Khudoni hydropower plant and Namahwani hydroelectric power plant, which is the most, I would say, indeed hot topic nowadays in Georgia, because a lot of protests have been mobilized even nowadays. Just these days are practically the fierce, opposition to this project. With, if we start, next slide, please, Khudoni hydropower plant. With the plant's 200.5 meter tall arch dam on underground powerhouse and a 528-hectare water reservoir, this project is just aimed to be constructed in Svaneti, northern western part of Georgia. It would really become the second largest actually hydropower plant in the country. The costs have been estimated at over 1 billion euros, but what is the problem? That there are a lot of problems, of course, but the project requires the resettlement of around 2,000 people, which is important in regards of just estimation of the local demographics there, and of course it would negatively affect cultural heritage and will not bring at the same time quite efficient, let's say, economic outcomes out of this project. Next slide, please. I will just stop here with the key issues. So I've mentioned around, just dislocation of around 2,000 people from this place, but also the problem that when this opposition really rose and it became kind of a nationwide even protest, government responded with certain degree of intimidation and peer campaigns. Project's benefits for Georgian public are practically very limited because of the low taxation and project company being registered offshore. And it might have this project adverse impacts on water streams or local culture and geological also stability as being assessed by different environmental NGOs and networks which are working in the region and in the country. Another project, and please another slide, with Namajuani hydroelectric power plant. The investment cost of the project was estimated around 800 million, and the Turkish company Inca Renewables Ltd plans to build this project in western part of the country, in the Rioni River Gorge, in municipalities of Tsaldubo and Sageri. The project would comprise of two actually HPPs, Tvishi, which would be an installed capacity of 100 megawatts.
Professor, please wrap it up in 20 minutes, 20 seconds.
Yeah. Thank you. And another also Namajuani Joneti, an HPP with much more bigger capacity, with the total capacity, as you might also see, is 433 megawatts. Another next slide, please. And key issues practically are geological, seismic risks, landslide hazards, microclimate changes, which are expected because of this construction. And it's all actually causes the bigger protests from the part of population, but also experts, civil society, even ongoing protests. Actually, you might see here, the next slide, please, on this, through these pictures, which are actually taken quite recently, even from ongoing actually protests, one of which was mobilized in the western capital of the country, in Kutaisi, by the end of February. Next slide, please. The general issue is actually is that the people are in general in Georgia against the construction of the bigger projects like this and bigger dams. And the last one, I would actually just focus very briefly about the role of journalists here. I've mentioned some environmental, of course, NGOs and networks. Among those are very active, actually, Bankwatch network, which is active in the Central and Eastern Europe, covering also Georgia's problems. But I would, of course, should mention, for instance, such media outlets like Gem News on Pisam Bebiji or Civilji or OC Media, etc., which are covering very critically, actually, this kind of, in general, environmental problems in the country. And nowadays, this attention, the major attention, as it was in the case just some years ago about anti-Khudoni protests, it is now focused about Namajuani HPP. Just a lot of people, not only, of course, locals, but thousands other people joined this protest, and it actually has the potential to become like a nationwide even movement. Very part of the critical situation and part of even political crisis, I would say, which is topical right now in Georgia. Thank you very much to everybody, organizers and participants.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Hassan Humeida at the University of Kiel of Flensburg in Germany.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to this conference. To my short presentation, I welcome you here. Next slide, please. The climate change, per definition, climate change describes the cooling or warming of the Earth's climate over a long period of time. And this change should be measured over a long period of at least 30 years. If we measure this change under 30 years, so we speak about weather change, this can be sunny, rainy, or snowy weather. Next slide, please. The causes of the global climate change are very different. We have here as a generic term the greenhouse effect and the greenhouse gases. We have two types, the natural greenhouse gases and then the man-made greenhouse gases. An example for these gases we have here: water vapor, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, ozone, and methane. The important one that leads to high emission in the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. We have also other gases through the agricultural production and processing, but also through the fossil oils and also the energy in different forms. Next slide, please. The global climate crisis is one of the urgent things that we have in the 21st century, and for this we need also urgent solutions. First of all, the recognition of the problem, and then the awareness about it, and after that the responsible action. And here to mention, every contribution of every person counts to this to this problem. Next slide, please. To the consequences of climate change, we have here 12-point global warming, extreme heat, and forest fire, but also melting glaciers, rising of the sea level, and floods. We have also water shortages all around the world, and drought, but also the desertification and the destruction of green belts that leads to poverty and hunger all around the world. When we just observe one thing, the last fire in 2019 and 2020 in Australia, so we have a loss of over 1 billion species. That is a big destruction for the biodiversity. And here a bird can fly from Australia to the rest of the world. Here we are all afflicted through this big destruction of the nature. Next slide, please. What can we do for global sustainability? We have the keys in the hands. We have just now until the fulfilling of the Agenda 2030, 9 years. Here we need the observation of the situation. We have to do studies to manage the outcomes and then to make recommendations in a scientific way. We have also not to forget the public. We have to inform the public and to discuss with them the current situation for possible changes. We have also to make optimization of our consume and behaviors, but also to adopt new systems, just like solar energy and wind energy. We have to correct our habits to better habits, and here we can just look how can we keep our environment clean, and also how to handle with our natural resources. For this, we need talks, we need conversations between the countries, for example, conventions and agreements. And here, the collaboration between the countries is very important to make implementation and also to make transformation to a better world. Next slide, please. I would like to share with you these 10 rules. I called this the golden rules. We have to tell the truth about the situation. We have to stay transparent and remain independent, even when we have something to do with institutions or with governments. We have to be well connected, like here in this conference, so we can give information to each other and provide each other with the new things. We have to proceed professionally in the big challenge of the 21st century. Here we can change the world firstly when we can change our own service. And here,
Dr. Fumeda, please
yes.
wrap it up in 20 seconds.
Okay, not to forget the next generation, to inform them about the problem, to think globally and do in the sense of the community, and not to forget that we have one Earth. Next slide, please. Here, just an idea from my side. We can look around the world for one event that we can call the global moment for one planet to tell facts about climate change. Next slide, please. My own contribution to the climate change in books for education for children and young people. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. Please take care of you, take care of people around you. Even the COVID-19 is the result of climate change. And here, take care of our green planet, the Earth.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Ms. Mbika Kulati, independent journalist based in India.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me for this conference. It's really wonderful to hear everybody. As all the colleagues before me have pointed out, the problem of climate change originates from greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, rampant urbanization. And my tryst with the environment began when I started working in 1999. I had gone to cover a conference I'd gone to cover an ashram in Rishikesh, which is India's spiritual capital. And over there, the ashram head told me that they were cleaning up the Ganga and the neighborhood, which of course is not very clean. And they were working on cleaning up the place because Rishikesh has a very high influx of people, tourists, foreigners, and even domestic tourists for religious pilgrimages. And that is how I began to understand that there is a problem. And when I was researching on it, I realized that the connection between human activity and the environment, the theory has been coming from the 1800s. From the 1800s, it has been studied, and it has come to a point where it's become a climate emergency in the 21st century, where we stand today. So today we have to work harder for it. We have to make people more aware about it, and we have to put our best efforts as journalists and media houses for it. How does the environment reporting work in India? Let me just point it out for you. So in traditional and print media and television, only as and when an important event happens or a disaster happens, they will highlight and talk about it. So you will find it on Times of India, on Hindustan Times, in the Hindu, in the Week, India Today. And then there are dedicated magazines and dedicated websites. So there is a respected NGO called Center of Science and Environment, which has a magazine down to earth. It even has a website. And there you will find all reputed and credible news. Then the Outlook group, which is one of the big groups in India, that has brought out a platform, Planet Outlook, where you will see everything that is happening to the environment happening over there. And so there have been multiple disasters in recent times. A 3,000-acre wildfire forest was 3,000-acre forest fire was in Rishikesh, and this was covered, but there were no follow-up stories. And then there was a glacier outburst, that again in Uttarakhand, which is an Himalayan state, and again there were no follow-up stories. So this is where I feel that we lack. And we need to cover this up very fast because we've got to have more follow-up stories. And here, I think the role of social media and the current new media steps in, and it becomes very crucial for us. Because the new media is a short format and it reaches the people faster in a shorter span of time. So there are credible sites like betterindia.com, like Your Story, And then there are celebrities who are promoting good earth and good practices. There is a singer called Papan. He's from Assam, and he has been talking a lot about this. He has been talking about mining issues, poaching issues, illegal issues, and how we should go for good earth practices. And these are the stories which I think, as journalists, we need to highlight, and we need to keep talking about them from time to time. Because going back to the morning special session with Deborah, she mentioned that one knock is not enough. It's not enough. We've got to keep on knocking doors till somebody hears us and understands us and trusts us. So to wind it up, I'll just tell you one or two policies that are in place by the government of India. There are a lot many, but I'm just highlighting one or two due to shortage of time. So in 2017, due to the very bad air quality in Delhi, the government of Delhi had introduced the odd even system. The odd even system was very simple to understand. On odd days, you could take the cars out with odd numbers. On even days, you could take out the cars out with even numbers. So this worked for 15 days, and the results were very good. But they did not go forward with it because of economic reasons. Then India has decided that by 2023, 25% of all privately owned vehicles on Indian roads will be electric vehicles, and all power plants will be using renewable energy. Farmers are being encouraged to hire machines to convert organic waste to fertilizers, eliminating the need to burn the straw at the end of each harvest, which is one of the major causes of pollution. I think I'll have to stop because it's ending here. But all I can say is that the time is short and we need to keep walking, we need to keep talking, and we need to keep knocking doors so that everybody understands the climate emergency we are in. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ms. Nilima Mathur, executive producer at Spots Film in India.
Greetings from India. It's amazing how we talk of climate change as if it's a new phenomenon. I mean, floods, droughts, cyclones, melting glaciers have been staring in our face for decades. We also tend to equate global warming as climate change, whereas in fact, global warming is only one aspect of climate change. Greenhouse emissions, or GHGs, are a great contributor to global warming. The present levels of GHGs is unprecedented across over at least 800,000 years of this planet. Energy consumption is the biggest culprit. As I write this presentation, a front page story was a depressing start to the day. A 17-kilometer stretch of a coastal area in an eastern state of India was once home to 700 families in a cluster of 7 villages. Once a weekend spot, today it stands deserted. A family that has been rehabilitated has one less member, a 40-year-old who has stayed back to somehow tend to his 20 buffaloes alone. Another old man who does not have the strength to make a shift catches fish that his wife and he eat. When possible, he crosses a 5-kilometer stretch that includes a creek and crocodiles to sell fish and fetch some free rations. This is the reality of rising sea levels. As per the report, 28% of the state's 550-kilometer coastline has been lost to the sea just between 1990 and 2016. WHO declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic. It also claims that climate change is the biggest threat to human health. So where are we? Look at the media coverage on COVID and climate change. Here is where we come to the media. A United Nations document 2020 and beyond mentions 2 important points. Technological solutions for 70% of today's emissions already exist. Oh, really? Now that is news. It ends with saying, if government, business, civil society, youth, academia work together, issues can be resolved. What is the missing noun? You got it, media. The most disturbing fact is that the mostly limited media attention is about Western countries. That does not point to political responsibility or pursue nuanced conversations. As we know, media shapes political reality and business interests. So the first question, does that come in the way of popularizing the 70% technological innovations that the UN mentions? Another fact is the commodification of the environment that lacks the human element. The coverage that is done is usually a loud noise with contrarian reports that confuse the public with highly scientific content. This way or that, the information is not communicated in an accessible, innovative, or reader-viewer-friendly way about communities in their local context. The intersection of mass media, science, and policy is a dynamic area with high stakeholders. As per some studies, Western print media tripled its climate coverage in the last 4 years. So interestingly, television channels like ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox together gave 142 minutes to climate change issues in 1 year. Google Trends in 2015 tell another story. Countries suffering from the impact of climate change are looking for more information on the internet. There is no doubt that internet media discourse is more intensive than it is on TV or in print. The problem again is how much of that is fact-checked and reliable. In 1993-94, there was an interesting climate-related television project in India. It brought together an ACE research organization, the industry, the National Television Channel, and a video production house, ours. This 52-part series, Stereo, of about 3 to 4 minute news features was broadcast weekly on television at prime time. Even today, after 28 years, we get inquiries about various indigenous technologies that were highlighted in them then. It clearly means critical stakeholders have to work together to make climate change stories relevant. Unless news about climate change directly affects us as individuals, as people, we are not going to take it seriously. Climate change, whether in our lifetime or that of our children and grandchildren, will be the ultimate equalizer, like COVID. Surely, that might be too late for this planet to hold our burden. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Kubanitsbek Tabaldiev, Director General at Khabar News Agency in Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you very much. My topic is climate change and the situation in Central Asia as a consequences of it. As many of you know of the tragedy in the region caused by the drying up of such large lake as the Aral Sea in the center of Central Asia, which was located in the middle and influenced the balancing of the regional climate. The lake has dried up during 2 generations of people, and now less than a quarter of the reservoir remains. Dust storm rises from the bottom of the dried up lake, which spreads almost throughout the entire region. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are especially affected by this because this dust falling on the glaciers from the Aral Sea accelerates the melting of the ice. The mountains of these countries accumulate almost 90% of the region's glaciers, which have remained unchanged for centuries. The water reservoirs in the 2 countries are accumulated by glaciers melting in summer format, all count regional reserves. In other words, glaciers of these 2 countries constitute the main source of drinking and irrigation water. About 40 years ago, these 2 rivers flowed into Lake Aral and kept its level in balance. Photo 3, please. Due to the melting of glaciers, the total area of the glaciers in the 2 countries has decreased by 30%. Because of this, the inflow of water from the mountains into the main rivers of two countries, Amur Darya and Sir Darya, have significantly decreased. These two rivers provide moisture during the growing season, and almost 70% of electricity for their countries is generated by hydroelectric power plants in these rivers. The decrease of water inflow in the summer is a matter of concern for the authorities of the two countries. If 15, 20 years ago, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan were considered as exporting countries of electricity, now, due to lack of water in the winter, both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are forced to buy electricity from their neighbors. This is only one of the consequences of climate change in the region. The second problem is the lack of drinking water in the region of Central Russia. With a huge hydropower potential, almost a third of the population of the entire region suffers from a lack of clean drinking water. According to experts, the increase in area temperature in Central Asia for the period of 2030 and 2050 will reach an additional 1 degree Celsius. Such warming will not only lead to a decrease in the volume of the glaciers, but also to large amount of evaporation of all water bodies in the region in the near future. According to scientists, an increase in air temperature by 1 degrees Celsius leads to an increase in the intensity of evaporation of water from the surface by 16%. The famous of Central Asia Lake Issyk, as you see in the screen, becoming an increasingly attractive destination for tourists. This lake is surrounded by high mountains up to 5,000 meters. The peaks of these mountains have always remained covered with ice, even in the hottest summer months. However, in the past 10 years, scientists are noticing more frequently that the mountains around the lake appear to be without glittering glaciers. Next, please, photo. And if the temperature increases by 2 degrees, the size of the glaciers on the southern slope of the mountains will decrease 70%, and on northern slope by 32%. Next, please. And this is steadily leading to the natural disasters. As a result of climate change, there is an increase of mud flows, landslides, and avalanches. Only in Kyrgyzstan alone, there are more than 5,000 different hazardous areas. Next, please. At present, in Central Asia, in addition to the danger of earthquakes, the danger of mud flows from the mountains is growing more and more for the 3 largest cities of the region, Tashkent, Almaty, and Bishkek. In general, more than 10 million people live in the dangerous mud flow zones in Central Asia, and climate change causing the accelerated melting of glaciers leads to increased risk and would flow down to plains. There is a bulk of population lives. Media of Central Asia regularly covered the situation in this region and focused on this problem, but it is not enough. Unfortunately, media in Central Asia is not as effective as in Europe and other countries like South Korea. Therefore, the world community and international organizations should be notified of possible natural phenomena caused by climate change for region with a total population of more than 80 million people and huge historical baggage. I hope that this information will attract the attention of the world community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Kena Halik, reporter at Laham magazine in Lebanon.
Hi, everyone. Media and world climate, opportunity and challenges. When the issue of climate change started to attract greater attention across the globe, not all media and journalists felt it was dramatic enough to be given more attention. Even for the media that thought the subject might be interesting for many readers and viewers, there was an inclination to cover it using their standards journalist guidelines of opportunity and naturality. However, when countries, especially in Europe, started to feel the impact of the climate changes, especially higher temperatures and several health, economic, and social problems, climate change started to gain greater attention. Climate change was, after all, a public interesting issue that deserved greater attention and deeper engagement by the media. Now that media recognized the significance and the risks of climate changes, they felt their moral duty was to inform the readers and viewers and to provide them with all the details they need to focus the ensuing challenges. In order to raise awareness about climate change, several media work out plans to enhance the qualities and the abilities of their staff, holding workshops and training sessions with experts to educate them on the issue. Journalists need to know the fact to avoid oversimplification and underestimation. They needed to learn how to ask the questions, build on the answers, and challenge allegations. While the effect is by media and journalists on reporting about climate change have been growing intensity. A serious problem that they have been facing is how to attract attention of young people who use social media and not through traditional media for their information. Another issue is that several countries are not keen on a greener world so soon because they believe that their economies cannot afford the change and that their populations will be badly affected. Reducing their resources such as fossil fuels for energy needs. People living in regions plagued with problems are also reluctant to accept media and journalistic forcing and climate change when they are pressed with other vital issues related to their everyday life and even survival. In my country, Lebanon, we are going through very challenging time regarding the country's politics and economy. They mean that despite all good intentions by the media and journalists about the climate change and the need to address them, they cannot focus on it. Viewers and readers will not really bother to watch or read their reports because they believe that they have much more important things to worry about right now. Maybe in the near future, the situation will change across the globe and all countries and media will pay greater attention to climate change and think of ways of making the world greener and safe for everyone to live in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.